Alireza Firouzja isn't just beating his opponents right now, he's absolutely destroying them, and this game is another great example of that. So he had the black pieces here, playing against the young Indian Grandmaster Gukesh. He's actually only 16 years old and the second youngest ever GM, so a very strong child superstar in his own right. So Gukesh opened up with d4 here, and Firouzja goes knight f6. I should say this was played in the Goldmoney Asian Rapid tournament. We now had c4 from Gukesh, c5 now from Firouzja, sniping immediately at the centre. We have d5 taking the space, and now b5. Here the fun begins. So this is the Benko Gambit, a really exciting and dynamic opening for black, and great for rapid play games. Now white accepts the gambit here, and now pawn to a6. This is the point of the gambit, that you actually give a second pawn, although you are going to win that back with either bishop or knight recapture. Bishop is most common, and when white takes this pawn, if indeed they do, they can go b6. Again, that's a different line, but we then get really free and easy development on the queen side of the black pieces. So Firouzja now plays pawn to g6. It's standard not to recapture that pawn yet, to leave options open and develop the king side. We have knight to c3 now, bishop to g7, and now pawn to e4, setting up the strong centre for white. Castles from Firouzja, knight to f3, and now queen to a5. So this is key to understand in the Benko, that we're playing for dark square control and also looking to use these open B lines and A lines. So the queen often sits on a5 where it pressures these dark squares. The bishop is also doing the same on the other diagonal, and once the rooks come to the B file, we can see that this b2 pawn will also be sensitive. So white has to be very careful, because black now has a big initiative for the pawn, and white has to play very accurately so as not to be worse. And here Gukesh actually goes immediately wrong. He plays pawn to a7, which is a mistake. I mean, if we look at the journey of this pawn, it's gone c4, captures on b5, captures on a6, and then pushed to a7. So Gukesh has moved the pawn 4 times in the opening, and that's breaking opening principles, which is generally a bad idea. And Firouzja now punishes this move really nicely, and I'd encourage you to pause the video and look for the move. Firouzja plays knight takes on e4, and we can see that he's exploiting this pin against the knight. Now I suspect that Gukesh had seen that Firouzja could play this, but he thought that after he takes the knight on b8 and the rook recaptures, he was doing okay here, especially with the quick development now of bishop to d3. But actually he's in all sorts of trouble now. So Firouzja chops on c3, and we note that white can't recapture with the pawn, or the queen jumps in with check, and whichever piece blocks here, we're losing the rook in the corner. We note that we don't take with the bishop, because now white can play bishop to d2, and we can't take the rook in the corner because we lose the queen here. So black actually is coming out worse in those lines. So here Gukesh instead played queen to d2, getting the queen out of the way of the attack and also pinning this knight to the queen behind it. So that's why Firouzja played rook a8 now, defending the queen, and now he's able to move the knight away. Gukesh now castles. We note that he can't take this knight because otherwise we take with the bishop and the queen is pinned to the king here. So he castles instead. And now Firouzja picks up a second pawn in the centre by taking on d5, and he now has a very commanding position with this strong centre here. So we have queen to g5 now, attacking the knight, pawn to e6, rook to d1, developing that rook into the game, bishop to b7 developing, and now queen to g3, eyeing these dark squares, but really white doesn't have a lot to do in this position now. So we have queen to a4, hitting the unprotected rook, rook comes across to e1, and now knight to b4, again hitting an unprotected piece and looking at this sensitive c2 square, and we can see that white is just getting bossed all over the board now. So the bishop drops back to b1, and now we have bishop takes on f3. So that was a very powerful bishop, but Firouzja's just simplifying now. He's better in this position, so why not chop off pieces? The knight now jumps into c2, forking both rooks, and Gukesh plays this move rook to d4, attacking the queen to get out of the knight fork in that fashion. But Firouzja just drops the rook back, hitting the white queen in return, so the queen drops to d3. Now we have d5, and look at these commanding pawns in the centre. The rook has to run away. We have pawn to c4 now, further tempos gained on the queen, queen to f1, and now knight to c2 was the final move of the game. Gukesh had had enough and resigned in this position, which really wasn't too soon. So an absolute crush from Firouzja there. If you liked this video and want to see more Firouzja videos, then click here, and subscribe to the channel to never miss a video, click here. Thanks very much for watching, and see you again soon.